Welcome to Adjunctitis, From Surviving to Thriving, teaching hacks to reduce stress, save time, and avoid common pitfalls. I'm April Brown, an associate professor of journalism at Cal State LA. Welcome to Season 2. I'm proud to announce that Adjunctitis is a 2024 Webby honoree in the Advice and How-To category, and it's a lovely accolade. But I'd also like to know if these episodes are actually helping people, so please do drop a line. All the details about where and how to share are at the end of the episode. If you're listening chronologically, I should reiterate something I mentioned early in Season 1. If you are in crisis, please look for the episode that most directly addresses your issue or problem. If there isn't one, please let me know, and I'll do my best to create one for you. Some of you may have noticed I haven't dropped a new episode for a while, and there's a reason for that, which I will go into in just a minute. But here we are, Season 2, welcome to Episode 17. Since I've been gone, or for those of a certain generation, Reality Bites would also apply. I usually start with a story that speaks to the topic of the episode, but this story is the episode, and it's why I've been absent for a while. I was having a good spring semester for about 2 weeks, managing all my academic responsibilities, regularly posting about the pod, working on getting new material and guests, and all that other creative and professional work we have to do. My documentary, some other stuff. But then something happened that really knocked me for a loop. And what's worse, I saw it coming, I flagged it up, and it didn't matter at all. I was scheduled to co-teach a class with a colleague, so we got together before the semester and talked about our vision and our plan. And my professorial co-instructor has been teaching for years. He's been around the block, about to embark on a well-deserved retirement. He's been so helpful in so many ways, and I was really looking forward to this collaboration before he left. We began discussing the students already enrolled in the class. We knew all of their names because our program is relatively small, and we do teach them all regularly. At this point, I wanted to talk about one student in particular who had given me trouble when I last had them in class. Now, this individual wasn't paying any attention in the lecture. They were consistently disruptive and demanded I walk them through step by step during the lab everything I had discussed in the lecture. I explained I was there to help everyone. They were disappointed I did not bow to their wishes. Now, I go over expectations and classroom behavior and what roles and responsibilities they have as students on the very first day. And I told them, at this particular instance, that they weren't going to get what they want because I simply have to serve the other students as well. I explained that if they needed extra help, that's what office hours were for. However, the student looked back at me and said I was discriminating against them. And I was stunned because I wasn't. This was the first time and the only time they brought it up to me that semester. I described precisely how I was doing no such thing and heard nothing else. So back to my conversation with this co-instructor. I wanted to give my colleague a heads up about my history with this student. Lo and behold, this student also accused my colleague of the same thing after getting a poor grade on the very first assignment. My colleague explained why he thought the grade was fair and described the proper grade appeal process. That student never returned to his class. And then he tells me this student did the same thing to 2 other professors as well. Now, this is all before the semester began. Then I realized I not only had the student in this class I was co-teaching, but also in another one. At this point, I'm seeing an MO. The student doesn't get what they want and then cries discrimination. That's a problem, and I wanted to know what I could do about it. I wanted guidance from someone higher up the food chain. I would quickly like to make it clear at this point that, of course, there are sometimes incidents of discrimination on campus. But I know what the rules are, I know what the law is, and I'm very careful about my behavior to make sure I'm not doing any of that. This was not one of those cases. However, I was told that because nothing had happened yet this semester, nothing could be done at this point. And it was not comforting. but at least the administration was on notice. Turns out the student dropped the class I was co-teaching, but not the other one. However, I still had a gut feeling something was coming. So I asked a different colleague if he'd come in and help me with that one class, just to have an extra eye on this student. So we had our first class, in which this particular student arrived 20 minutes late, making noise, moving around furniture, and then generally paying no attention whatsoever to any of the lecture or the conversations we were having. Every time I looked over to engage them, they were on their phone or rummaging around in their bag. When I asked if there were questions, the student asked ones that had been answered in the 20 minutes they missed. We got through the class, though, without incident. Big sigh of relief. Thought we were out of the woods. Until the night before our second class. Around 5 p.m., I got an email copied to several administrators, and the student had written that they were assaulted in my class by another student in that previous week's class. And I wasn't sure how to answer this because we both had our eye on this student and had seen nothing unusual or untoward. So I quickly called my colleague who'd been in the room, and I wanted to double check that he too had seen nothing unusual. I certainly hadn't. And then I started texting my more knowledgeable colleagues and administrators as to how I should respond. And, at 5 o'clock, people aren't necessarily getting back to you super quickly. So several hours later, and before I received any advice back, there was another unfounded accusation in my inbox. I began to feel very uncomfortable, and I felt anxiety creeping up quickly. And the reason for that is, as a journalist, my professional reputation is important to me. Once a journalist's reputation is damaged, it is really hard to get that back. And so I had a really hard time going to sleep. I had a feeling this could really blow up. And then I woke up at 2 a.m, anxious, and there it was. An email with an unfounded accusation about me, CC'd to the Title IX office, saying that I had discriminated against this student. So now what? Let me digress for a moment to say that I have rarely suffered from anxiety. And this second time was similar to the first in that I had no control over what was happening. I felt something like this might be coming. My colleague and I had our eyes peeled to make sure that nothing of that sort was happening. I was so upset, and I did not want to face this individual without support and more witnesses. And those were a bit difficult to gather before class the next day. But 2 administrators did come to the following class. The student did not. I was eventually told that due process needed to take its course. But that didn't sit very well with me because my reputation was at stake. So I asked a colleague, an entertainment lawyer, if he knew any employment lawyers I could talk to about this problem. I just would have felt better with some legal guidance, something more solid. As it turns out, he'd been through a similar ringer before, and we're going to hear from him. A quick note first. Even though we're talking about legal issues and we will be talking with a lawyer, none of the information in this episode, or indeed any of the Adjunctitis podcasts, should be construed as legal advice. As always, consult your own lawyer and experts. Daniel Spitz is a tenured professor at Santa Barbara City College and a lecturer at Cal State LA. Daniel Spitz, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, April. I really appreciate it.
We went through a similar situation, of course, and in our separate islands as teachers, I didn't know this for a long time. We had students accusing us of things we did not do. And the process by which you deal with that was really frustrating, and for me, and I didn't know it was for you because we've talked about it, really emotionally devastating for a while. Can you, in a nutshell, kind of describe what your situation was and how you handled it?
Sure. I had a student a couple of years ago, in my very first month of working in Santa Barbara, write a very formal complaint about my grading. as well as the type of work I was assigning, to my department chair, to my dean, to the head of the college in this case. And I tried to deal with the student personally. It didn't really resolve itself on its own, so I had to kick it upstairs. My dean department chair dealt with it. There was no sort of wrongdoing whatsoever. But yeah, it was an emotionally draining situation and a black hole of time that none of us get back. Um, but I've learned from the experience. You learn how to communicate better with students, how to adjust your syllabus if you need to avoid these issues in advance and have something in writing to rely on. And you also get a chance to share knowledge with your colleagues in terms of, hey, when this happens to you, here's what I learned, here's how I dealt with it, and here's what you shouldn't do in this case. In hindsight, I probably said too much to the student and should have just left it to the higher ups in this case. Um, as a result of making those adjustments, those situations haven't happened since.
Well, I have noticed that my own syllabus has basically become an enforcement contract, for lack of a better term. Like everything that I've had trouble with, there is now a line to deal with in the syllabus. Um, but what was funny, not funny, haha, obviously, in my situation is it was, I was potentially, I called you because I said, do you know of any lawyers that could help in this kind of situation? And I did not know until that moment that it was a more common problem than I thought. And so, for people in general who run into this, what would your kind of four-step program of figuring out, how to proceed, what would that look like?
Sure. My initial advice comes from just being an attorney for the last 10 years. You document everything. Everything that you have in writing, everything that's been said to you in writing, you keep a record of it because those things will be repeated ad infinitum. So that's the first step. The second step is really just having open lines of communication, certainly with your department chair, but also with other colleagues. Because while no one wants to talk about these situations, it does happen to all of us. And we don't openly publicize these things because they're not positive, but we can learn from each other through these experiences. Step three, I would say, is adjust your syllabus after these things are done. Close the loop on where there are gaps. And the last step, if we're going through the four-step program, make the adjustments to your curriculum as well. So, for instance, when the problem arises from a group project, I included the option to do this assignment individually without penalty. So now I've covered my bases. I have my record. I've shared it with my higher ups and colleagues so we don't face this issue either individually or together in the future. And you make the adjustments to your course, both from an enforceable contract syllabus and how you teach the same assignment going forward.
One of the things that you said to me that was a little bit surprising, and I don't want this to sound like I'm knocking administrators, but they really either didn't or didn't feel like there was much they could do. And for me, facing something like this for the first time, that was hugely frustrating and frightening. Because if I have
Yeah.
no control and I have not a great feeling of support, what's going to happen?
Sadly, trusting the process and trusting administration, some administrators are better than others. I mean, I like to joke that, how many people work at the college? About half of them. And so I found that the for lack of a better word, the needs of administrators, or at least the motivators for them, are different than they are for faculty. They're dealing with extreme budget reductions right now from the state all the way down. They're dealing with lower enrollment that has not come back since COVID kicked in. And so their priorities are saving face in the media and guaranteeing enrollment. And quite frankly, what happens to us day to day is incidental to their jobs. So yeah, it can be a bit disheartening to find that they don't necessarily have our backs as much or at all compared to what we expect or would need. But it shouldn't change our approach.
I can't thank you enough for doing this for us. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'd like to end this episode with the end of that story. So, what happened after I was told to wait for due process to take its course? After weeks and weeks of hearing nothing, I finally inquired, and I was told the student never actually came in to make a formal report. But week after week, I had anxiety attacks, expecting they could pop in at any given time because they never dropped the class. I'm still concerned about something like that happening again, but I now have some tools, and I hope you do too. That's all we have for this episode. You can find Daniel Spitz at www.danielspitzlaw.com. You'll be hearing more from him on an upcoming episode. If you have questions you'd like me to try and answer, please send them to questions@adjunctitis.com. Meanwhile, social media is a great tool for everyone to get involved in this conversation. Right now we're on Threads, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube with the handle @adjunctitis. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/adjunctitis. Please spread the word, help those who ask you for help. It's good teaching karma. Adjunctitis is a Look at It This Way production. I'm April Brown. Thank you for listening. Class dismissed.